I am a mass timber specialist for our U.S. Construction and development businesses here at Lendlease. We are very interested, I think, in innovation in general, but our interest in mass timber specifically is kind of rooted in our sustainability goals. We are, we're targeting 2025 net zero on scopes 1 and 2 and absolute zero without the purchase of offsets by 2040, which is aggressive. And in some ways, I think we don't exactly know how we're going to get there, but we know that, with structure and envelope being a huge embodied carbon contributor, that scope 3 emission goal is we're going to have to engage in more mass timber structure, really, in order to kind of reach those goals.
Yeah. So that's absolutely wild. I think that's definitely industry leading. Absolute zero by 2040, no offsets, somehow zero. So, you got mass timber as an option, but other material categories, I guess, have to lift their game as well. Is that right? Or, I mean, you said it's we're sort of waiting for a few things to move in that direction.
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because I think part of I won't say gamesmanship behind like reaching targets, but part of actually being able to reach the targets is establishing what you're going to be measuring and what you're going to be reporting. And actually, it looks like the way Lendlease is at least going to attempt to do this in the near future is to really track what we're doing with cement, aluminum, glass, and steel, which is interesting because, timber is not necessarily on that list, but we, by displacing some of those materials that we are measuring with a material that we know has better carbon performance, but that doesn't mean that we don't still have to really push the industries in those 4 categories to get to zero, because that's really what it's going to take, I think, in general. You can't make the whole world out of wood as much as I would like. And even then, there's embodied carbon in the process of making wood. So how do you get to absolute zero without the purchase of offsets, right?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the good things about timber is like I feel like people in this space, it's like almost implicit. You don't have to try and talk about sustainability because we know that. More exciting is sort of driving down the cost of sustainability through what mass timber can provide. So I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about whole building componentization. I struggle with words sometimes. What this is and what the evolutions are in this space and what it means for the industry.
Yeah, so I think I've kind of come to this slowly, but I think that whole building componentization is really the space that mass timber allows us. Well, it does 2 things. Number one, it's enabling us to get cost efficiencies out of mass timber. But number 2, it's also addressing the underlying issue with rising construction costs in general, which is just really low productivity. Every project is, a masterpiece in and of itself. And, there's very little repetition, both in process and in product. So I think there's these benefits that we see in mass timber that we can't actualize because we're not willing to streamline processes and kind of create repetitious product, number one. So we kind of have to do that in order to get more efficiencies out of mass timber, but also mass timber enables the ability to do that easier than maybe some other materials. So it's not something I think we can do. Like, it's not really, it's like more of a stair step. in some ways. One's not going to lead the other. They kind of both have to work in unison. But my thoughts on whole building componentization are really that a lot of people pay a lot of homage to the fact that mass timber has a lot of schedule benefits, and that is going to be what offsets this material premium. And I do have some thoughts about, I don't believe that the material premiums are specifically in the timber, and we can talk about that. But specifically on the schedule front, structure to structure, there are projects where there is almost zero advantage from a concept perspective for mass timber. And in other cases, you might have a structural schedule advantage, but it's only for a couple of floors, right? So in order to further compress the schedule, you need to follow the critical path. What is after structure? What is the next critical path element? And how can you expedite that on the back of mass timber? Mass timber being very, having really tight tolerances lends itself to the ability to do other prefab offsite and have it come on site and marry really well with that system. So anyway, I think the idea of whole building componentization in my mind is really addressing critical path throughout the entirety of the project, and leveraging the whole series of benefits that you get with mass timber in order to achieve that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that so much, because when we talk about like a theoretical 80% faster, 50% faster, if you just hit a in situ core, you're just waiting for that anyway. So how do you think about, say, like alleviating bottlenecks within the whole construction program outside the mass timber? What are some of the things that sort of need to be like massaged to get the whole productivity of the whole building going as fast as possible?
Yeah. So I think after structure, right, the first thing becomes the facade, and using prefabricated facade systems that don't require scaffolding, that really can enclose the building very quickly. Why? Because then you can bring your sheetrock and your mechanical subtrades in super early. So I think facades is the first one. The interesting thing is that since mass timber kind of has hit the market, I'd say over the last 5-7 years or so, there's been a ton of prefabricated facade products kind of available in the market at different levels. It's not just window wall and curtain wall, there's kind of this like broader spectrum of facade products that you can couple with these mass timber structures. I mean, obviously they can be used for any structure, but the market that they have in mind when they're creating these is to be coupled with a mass timber structure. After that, I would say the space where we still need market development and product development is kind of in the MEP space. And I think where we've seen the most I could say the most synergy, and again, it's not is with either wet walls or basically companies that are doing bathroom pods and can do other areas of customization, can do wet walls or mechanical rooms or things like that. But we also need kind of distribution prefab in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of that, I think, is rethinking how we're distributing our MEP through the building, and if there's a way to minimize first, and if there's systems that, again, have synergy with sustainability objectives and energy efficiency, and then also lend themselves to less on-site installation or on-site construction. So I think this is a space where we've seen lots of things being tried, and there's some benefits to a few different product types. but it's, you know, we've seen things work, and I think we'll continue to see that market develop, um, and it couples really well with mass timber.
Mm.
So after that, I think there's some spaces that I know need to be addressed that I haven't seen a whole lot of proliferation, and that would be with vertical circulation. In order to like top out a building, you have to have, all of your egress fully installed and ready to go. You have to have your elevators in, which tend to be sometimes some of the last things on the project. So I know that there's work going on trying to modularize and simplify the on-site construction of those elements. But that I would say is like one step further out.
Mm. That's so cool. So we're over here in Australia, we see some of the things happening, over in the US, and there's some big plays and venture capital going towards like Katerra, and we see Sidewalk Labs doing crazy stuff and Intelligent City. What are some of the lessons learned, some of the reasons things haven't gone as predicted, and the things we can take things forward? Because, I guess it's one of those things. There's all these big problems in construction. It seems like vertical integration is the key, but for some reasons things don't go as planned. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because whole building componentization isn't necessarily a new concept. It's a mouthful of stuff to say, but we see companies out there understanding the value of coupling multiple components in a single product delivery scheme. So we're talking about Katerra and Sidewalk Labs. They feel like examples of how whole building componentization is maybe not meant to succeed. And I would say that really what those companies tried to do was to vertically integrate, to your point, and to do design, manufacture, installation, the whole kit and caboodle. I think in order to have that, you also need a really strong pipeline, which I think both Katerra and Sidewalk Labs were maybe lacking. And perhaps there's other reasons that their business models, that participated in that business model not working out. But I think what we're seeing now is the people coming into the market, folks like Intelligent City, for instance, they are vertically integrated for a certain set of scope. So they are fabricating mass timber products. They're not necessarily manufacturing the components themselves. They're doing the fabrication, the design and fabrication. They are fabricating the exterior wall systems as well. So as a project, you can go have some design services and then get a certain range of products. I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about their delivery model, and I'm sure it changes. This is the other thing. All of these companies are constantly shifting their business model, which makes it hard to track how you as a GC or an owner or whatever can like plug in to using these services. But then there's I think another model which is really asset light that I've seen companies like Juno, which is a Bay Area company that are doing a lot of streamlining the design approach and making sure that the products being utilized in the design are highly repetitive, and they can easily translate those to fabrication models, so that basically what you're doing is you're truncating the design cycling, which is huge, and I think is a space where mass timber in particular, can be an accelerator for change. But that business model really relies on, having the bidding opportunity that stretches in the right range, right? And if there's not a bunch of if there's not a bunch of people operating with that business model, it becomes hard to compete in a normal sense, because you have a suite of services that nobody else is offering identically. You know what I mean? So anyway, for whatever that's worth.
Well, it's like the front runners have got the arrows in their backs or whatever, and then then the pipeline you're saying is key to all this. So it's hard. The pipeline, maybe demand is building as we go forward. And in Australia, for example, we had Schools Infrastructure New South Wales who did a kit of parts requirement over 10 years for all their schools. So it's gives that pipeline certainty, and is really good leadership from the public sector. But it seems like something like that, certainty around some sort of pipeline means people can make these huge leaps, because if they make the leap and the pipeline's not there, then you got the empty factory essentially, and the costs that come with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think some of these companies that are taking on a certain segment of the market, right? Like the vertical integration, they're not taking the full vertical integration, they're taking a certain piece of it, and are able to be really asset light, allows them to be more flexible and respond to the opportunities that come their way, and it doesn't necessitate the same level of pipeline. Does that make sense? Because they're able to flex. They're not the manufacturer. They have relationships with the manufacturers. So, and obviously they would need some sort of versatility in their, they need more than one manufacturer that can make a certain product subset. But that enabling that flexibility takes them away from the necessity for that same type of pipeline.
I love how I've never heard that the way you describe it, sort of like vertically integrated with a specific scope, which is such a really cool way to do it. Does that mean architects at the very front end, or it's on designers to work out what these scopes are from the supply chain, whether it's a fully vertically integrated or just a manufacturer, and then bring that up front? So what are your thoughts on sort of that, bringing that information to the very front of a project?
Well, I think this right now is the part I think that's tripping up the most amount of progress in construction productivity, because there's so many different ways you can dice up the project procurement. And and I say procurement, I mean consultant services and things like that too. And because there's so many different ways you could model the way the project delivery, it kind of stymies you have to have, basically what you've done is the construction industry is so complex. The way we've operated for years is look, we know how to do this. Everybody does it the same way. We design it, we bid it, we build it. And that, even though everybody knows that system is broken, there's players that do this portion, there's players that do this portion, and there's players that do this. And everybody, there's the amount of communication that has to happen between each of those silos is actually very little with regards to process, because there's a well understood way that it works. Now, when we're trying to kind of mix design and build, or or even public-private partnerships, where you've got development and design and build, but you're trying to integrate certain pieces, there's a lot more communication that has to take place in order to scope the project right before you've even started it. And all of these different business models just make for a messy, make for all of it being really messy. And I'd say mass timber is right in the middle of it. Why? Because everybody sees all of these opportunities with mass timber to change both the process and the product. And so we're tweaking dials on both sides. And it's part of why you don't see mass adoption in my mind. It's not so much, yes, there's cost challenges, but it's, adding more complexity to a system that's already very complex. You know, and you're not going to see a lot of synergy building that quickly with all the different things that are being tried. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. So, you know, you mentioned before the material costs being not all in the mass timber. I'm interested in one hand, like here, what are the other things where it's just material, you're going to actually have a higher price. But, you know, following on from that, like, are the cost curves, where are we now? And are the cost curves improving at a rate? And say if we did design in this sort of way and philosophies we're talking about now, do you see the cost curves improving to a point where it's, you know, unequivocally cheaper than the traditional way of doing things?
It's a good question. I'm going to try to talk around it if I can, in terms of like, where do I see it going? But so first of all, structure to structure in most markets, actually vertical structure to vertical structure in most markets, if you're not competing with light frame construction, timber is actually more cost efficient, and by a margin. Where we end up adding a lot of costs, at least in the project that I've seen, is when we couple it with the lateral system. So part of that is the, you know, if we're using traditional lateral systems, for instance, is it the reduced scope that is driving prices up, or, you know, or the, you know, in order to mobilize for a concrete or steel company, there's a certain amount of cost. Now those are being averaged over a smaller, you know, footprint of actual material that they're installing. I don't see it really being an integrated piece. It's not because they're working on a timber project. I think there's also not, specifically with steel, there's big steel companies that'll do full steel buildings, and then there's like miscellaneous metals, right? And the projects where we're trying to use steel as a lateral system tend to be kind of in between what those two kind of companies want to do. There's also, you know, the complexity of, you know, managing trade and labor contracts, right? And how are you having a mixed crew? And I think the market is working itself out from that perspective. But the lateral systems tend to be when you combine the vertical timber system with the lateral system, that's when it's harder to compete with the full concrete or the full steel building. Where we recoup those costs, the number one place is in foundations. So I always tell people, I'm like, if making this a lighter building doesn't help eliminate the deep foundation situation, you're going to have a really hard time making it less expensive than the steel or the concrete building. You have to be able to capitalize on that. And so this is where, when we talk about composite floor systems, or you know, using concrete toppings, you're not reducing the weight of that structure in some of those situations enough to perhaps get the full foundation benefit. And in some cases, it doesn't matter. You could make it a lot lighter, and you have to have a crazy foundation for some other reason, right? Because of soil conditions or the lateral system or like whatever. So that's your number one lever. There's a lot of things that are adding cost to a timber structure from a traditional perspective. So we talked about the lateral system, but there's also the fire resistance. If you're in a structure that requires a lot more sheetrock, you know, that's, while you can say, oh yeah, we're going to eliminate all the sheetrock in a fully exposed building, right? You're going to pay more for the material package. And perhaps it's still cost competitive with the structure. But when you're getting up to the heights where you need to encapsulate that timber, that ends up being a significant cost addition to the overall project. You pay a little more for the acoustic assembly, you pay a little more for building envelope, you know, depending on where the timber's interfacing with building envelope at the roof, or, so, and so the things, the levers that you're pulling in order to get cost efficiency are obviously material efficiency, but I don't lean really hard on that. It's foundations. It's like being able to leverage the schedule advantage. Schedule alone will not make it pencil,
Mm. Mm.
it will help, but it won't do the trick, at least in any project that I've seen. And then obviously are you getting some financial advantage on the carbon side? And I think that's the space where a lot of mass timber people are still holding their breath and waiting for the ability to see that play out in the financial part of comparing these projects or comparing these structural systems,
Yeah. So when there'll be like net zero, when offsets, the trend toward buying offsets increases and the cost of those offsets increase as well, then that becomes more and more of a thing. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that when people talk about, oh, well, when the price of mass timber comes down, and this is like, I get frustrated with that conversation because I personally don't think that all the projects I'll get, it's not the mass timber that's killing the project. It's not being able to leverage these other advantages,
Yeah.
and paying a premium in these other project scopes, which are code driven or, yes, impacted by the fact that the structure is timber, but it's not the timber itself. But I do think that the timber industry, the mass timber industry in particular, can probably get to higher efficiencies if they're able to manage their own pipeline of work so that some of it is very standardized and providing more of a throughput, something that they can produce in between jobs to keep the factory running and making money without requiring this mass customization, project specific design. So I think that some of these outfits that are focused on repetitive design solutions that are utilizing mass timber as their structural chassis have the potential to participate in the manufacturer's ability to provide better throughput, and then, reducing their overhead and allowing for, more consistent and efficient pricing.
Yeah. Awesome. Love that. Getting towards the end of the podcast now, can you tell us a bit of an overview of just the evolving market in US in general? So are there major hurdles right now? Are things just going boom? Like how is it over there?
Oh, it's not a good time to ask that question.
That's
We
fine.
are, I think, anticipating like major slowdowns. So we have a lot of our Silicon Valley clientele have put a lot of projects on pause. I think reassessing the market in general post-COVID, but also, some of the market volatility issues are also kind of scaring people off. And then I think the price of money is also quite high right now. So investment is harder for projects to get, and therefore, projects are fewer and farther between. I think that's the sentiment at this point. That's kind of where we feel like the market is going. Now, I mean, there's lots of people theorizing much smarter than me, and I'm not a market person, but that the dip will be small and short. And so there's a lot of effort to use this time for project, piloting some of these. I mean, the beauty of downturns for innovation is that this is the time where you maybe don't have a lot of dollars, but you have the time. So how can you leverage what you do have to get ahead for the next market cycle, upward market cycle, when you don't have the time to, think really hard about how you might do this better, you know?
Yeah. 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 When you're busy, it's just like whatever works, you just keep it going, and then then it just
Yes.
goes. Um, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Lisa. Can you tell us just about what do you see as the future going forward? Any sort of blue sky thinking about where everything's heading?
Yeah, I really think whole building componentization is offers probably the most promise for um, you know, mass timber execution at scale. And I think that the prefabricated and offsite construction market has realized that this is a great structural chassis. And as they start pumping out, solutions to address these critical path um, elements, we are going to find that it is an easy stair step into low carbon structures. So
Mm,
I'm really excited. I'm actually excited about this construction lull because I feel like we're going to get our feet under us and ready to run
yeah,
in the next up cycle.
100%. If people want to find out more about yourself, Lisa, or anything what we're talking about, anything where people should go, who are listening right now.
The Lendlease obviously has a lot of information on the projects that we've delivered on our website. But reach out to me. There's a lot of smaller organizations, I think, contributing to the to this kind of innovative mind space, and I'm happy to connect you with some of these organizations. So, yeah.